Great. Welcome everybody to our, is it October, I guess?
It
Our
is, right.
October Parks Board meeting. Thank you for joining us. Let's see, it's, I think for the welcome introductions, I guess introductions, we have Amber joining us for a update on the Lakefront Park. Next on the list, you see, sorry, the agendas were printed up. There's there. If you have a chance to take a look, we need please review the agenda and we will approve it so we can move forward. To do that, I need a proposal to approve and then a second. Or a motion to approve.
I propose.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great. All in favor of the agenda as written?
Aye.
That looks like a lot of us. Thank you. Next for approval and review is are the two sets of meetings from the June and August meetings. It's been a while since we met, but the August one, we didn't quite have enough people to approve it. So,
No, they just weren't done yet.
oh, is that what it was? All right,
Right.
that's all right. Here we are now.
And Richie's online now.
Oh, great. Hi, Richie. So take a look at those. Those are in the packet. If you have any comments, let us know. Otherwise, we can go forward with a motion to approve and a second.
Move to approve. Six.
Great, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes as written?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, that part's done. Now we get to the fun stuff. Oh, that's very important, so thank you all for that. But Lakefront Park project update. Amber, do you want, this is your
Yes.
chance to take it away.
Great,
Great.
okay, so I have an update today and we will be talking about interpretation, so. A quick update on where we are, so you guys have seen the project design through 70%, and then we have been in land use permit submittals, so that's permitting through the city first, the local permitting, as well as state and federal permitting, so we've submitted to the Army Corps, that is underway, we have submitted to well, the city, the SEPA has been issued at this point. That's a state permitting thing that's administered through the city. We're submitting our state permitting for WDFW shortly, so that we couldn't do until permitting initial or the SEPA initial opinion had been published. So essentially, we are in a waiting period for comments and a waiting period for appeals on the SEPA. And then once that is through that period of time, then the determination will be issued, which allows us to go to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner hearing will happen, we hope, in December. The hearing examiner then has 2 weeks to approve. Once we get that decision, it will go to ecology. They have 90 days to approve. So there's still quite a bit of permitting waiting to happen. You know, for what we have seen thus far, the design is in very good shape, but we don't want to push it farther with the risk of the decision is that something needs to change, then we would have to go back and rework that. So we're basically on hold with the design work, with everything except advancing the permitting step by step as the agencies are ready to do those things. So we anticipate that the design is going to pick back up in January, and that we'll move to 100% and then to bid construction. So in the meantime, we're working with Corey to make sure that our funding is in place, whatever we need to do there, and then our permitting team is working for permitting. Outside of that, what we can be working on are things like our interpretive timeline. So our interpretation, you all are familiar with interpretive panels, you know, something like a panel that goes in a project. Those are often done after the project is completed. Project is completed, we'll put a panel in. The way that we prefer to do interpretation is to actually integrate it into the site design. So to have more interactive experiences where people are engaging in additional messaging beyond what's sort of offered visually, and they don't necessarily have to stop and look at a panel to read it. It's more happening all around.
Are you talking about panels in the park? I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure. We're talking about interpretive elements in the park.
In the park,
Yes,
okay.
so the park design includes 3 elements
Right.
as part of the design of the park. So those elements can be signs, but they don't have to be. And so the way that we approach this with a project that's in construction is to design interesting, intriguing ways that we can bring interpretive content and sort of layer the experience of the park with also information and additional education, but not necessarily have it be, we build a park and then we put a panel in there. And so some reminders about the scope of our and timeline. It's basically, we have 3 exhibits. Those will respond to one or more interpretive themes, so they may hit on several elements. They really consist of a design idea, and that may be more than just one sign. It might be several elements that respond to one idea. So our fabrication costs are something that we're exploring at this increment, 70% design. And then that'll be refined at 100% design, which will come with the later design increment of the park plans. So there are many factors that affect cost. We've talked about this before, size, materials, quantity. So for example, if we do something like a plant ID tag, and it's 2-tone, so it's say a color panel engraved, that has one cost. If we do a full color something, that is a different cost. If it's on, a base of Corten steel, that might be more expensive than say a 4x4 wood post. If we do 8 of them, it's more expensive than if we do 4. So there are a lot of decisions that we can make to manage the cost. And so that's part of this exercise that we do as we take something from concept idea through 70% and then into 100%. So we are working in our cost estimate, our construction cost estimate, with a 30K line item for all of the exhibits together. So that's what we're trying to sort of balance the cost and materiality and quantity to hit that 30K estimate to keep us within what we have been looking at for a cost projection for construction. Now, if we have additional dollars from grant funding or from other sources, we could increase that. If we need to cost manage, then we can reduce that. But for now, that is the target that we're working for, because that's what we've had in the estimate. And where we're at. So just a reminder, a recap. Oh, looks like Josh has a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was at a meeting of the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation Board where they were talking about doing plant tags for Grace Cole. It sounds like they're pretty far along in the planning process for that. Mm-hmm. And I said that I was going to mention that with this group at some point and see if we couldn't at least come up with some consistent design and maybe even use the same vendor and have it all be the same stuff and maybe get volume discounts out of it somewhere along the way. So saying that out loud so that I'm not the only one who knows it.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so a reminder about some of our interpretive themes. So the interpretive work and interpretive planning for this park was that we had a stakeholder engagement interpretive planning session. So this was like a 2-hour, I think it was I don't remember if it was 2 hours or 3 hours, but we did an interpretive planning workshop. We had representatives of numerous organizations, including from the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation and others that were present at that. We did some research and engagement. So what were some papers and documentation about the history of Lake Forest Park? What do we know about the natural resources that are present here, the different ecologies? And then we did some engagement with the public through one of our public workshops to see how were people responding to different themes and topics that emerged from that research and from the interpretive planning session. So this is the results of that. So we have our main themes. These were the ones that resonated the most with the community members and stakeholders. We did a survey where we had a bunch of people respond with their feelings about the interpretive statements and interpretation. We also talked about them at the workshop. And then of course, those do appear in the interpretive plan. So we have secondary themes as well. And then we do have some tertiary themes that were additional things that have come out of our numerous touch points and surveys and engagement comments that we've received from the public as things that they really found important about this park. So these are the 30% concepts that I'll go through the exhibits one by one. We'll look at the 30% concept and then we'll look at how that's iterated forward to 70% design. So the Parks Board has seen the 30% concepts previously. And based on the reception to those and the permission to go forward with that concept to 70% design, that's what we're reviewing today. So for exhibit 1, we have an exhibit on the historic lake level. So this is basically where we're reminding individuals about some of the timeline of this property. So walking onto the property, people understand where the lake shore is now, but they may not necessarily understand that the lake shore is actually behind them by the time that they're in the park. So they're actually essentially wading through what was the old transect of the nearshore lake ecology. So where that line falls is essentially on this entry, can you see my cursor? So this entry path, the 28 contour runs right through here in the park, basically. And so people actually step over what was the historic lake level line. And then as they're walking on this path, the aspect of the park starts from 28 and it descends all the way to about 18 and a half, which is the current lake level. And so you're descending 10 feet. And so what this program of exhibits is a marker that occurs at the 28-foot elevation throughout the park. So it starts on the ground line. And then as you walk further, it gets to ankle height, and then to knee height, and then to waist high, and then it's over your head by the time that you get to the shoreline. So what we proposed was a system of markers that would basically, when you're looking, it would connect in a plane that you could kind of visually imagine over the park, but it wouldn't be so overt as to say, this is what this is. So the goal is to pique interest and initially get kind of that curiosity growing about, wow, this is a landscape that's changed. So we talk a lot about restoration, and the framework of modern restoration is very much to restore in concert with the degraded ecologies and the now modern state of things. So as much as we can say, restore this shoreline, restoring it to when is a question that we have to ask. So the 70% concept, what we've explored is essentially to look at how this would be created in real time. So the last exhibit, 30%, showed the idea, but it was, crude using some symbols, and here's what we're going for. This is really describing how this would be constructed and how it would be detailed in the construction plans. So what we're proposing is a metal inlay. So there are, integrated color metals, like an anodized aluminum, for example, is a very reasonable cost metal. To have a subtle marker that notes the 28-foot contour. So this is what it would look like. It would be about, 1.5 feet by 5 inches tall. We can play with that size, but the cost estimates are based on that size. And it would kind of intercede just into the sidewalk, as you can see here. So it wouldn't be something that, again, sticks out as competing with anything. There is something, the very real phenomena called sign pollution, which is basically where you have just too many things going on. We want to eliminate that. And the goal would be that the first time you come to this park, you don't see everything, right? There's like these little bits of discovery that you're kind of piecing together over repeated experiences at the park. So here's some examples of how this is constructed in other ways. So it's a system of metal letters. Those are installed into the concrete as it's poured. There are a number of ways that we can fabricate this. We can have the contractor fabricate it in the field. We can have a vendor basically prefabricate it into a concrete block and then set the concrete block in the path. So there's still some ways that we can, be continuing this idea as we move from 70% to 100% time.
One quick,
Yes.
when you say 28 feet, you mean like an elevation of 28 feet above sea level?
Yes.
Is that right?
Right. So the current lake level
Right.
is 18.5 feet. That's what the water level, well, it's the ordinary high, and then it's a managed lake level that, goes up and down. But 28 feet is the approximate prior elevation.
When you say prior, what do you, when prior?
So it would have been in the early 1900s, prior to the construction and operation of the lake.
So I would just like, I think that's a really fun idea.
Mhm.
I would really think though that we would want to put in, when was it 28?
Sure.
Because if not, it's like,
Yeah. Or how
what
about
is this?
something?
What do you mean 28? Nobody's gonna know. So I think
Right.
it's very important if we're trying to
Mhm.
illustrate the history of this area of the waterfront, then I think it's really important to identify historically when things are happening. And I don't know if there are other things that are gonna be illustrative of
Right.
historical things, but I would.
And that could be a good opportunity to showcase some historic photos with
Exactly.
history,
Yeah.
timeline. and-
Tied in. It doesn't need to be necessarily written in metal in the concrete, right? But if that information is discoverable somewhere, that'd be pretty cool.
Right, so you can see here, this is historic lake level. This could be pre-1912 lake level. It could be historic lake level, prior to construction of Chittenden locks. There is any number of things that, we can iterate on the text. Yeah.
Related to the lots.
Yes,
the change.
yeah,
And I sort of like, I appreciate.
And that may be something also through,
I appreciate what you're saying about sign pollution,
Mhm.
and that what you're talking about here is maybe like some subtlety to it.
Yeah.
Would cause people to then discover it,
Yeah.
so everyone doesn't get explained.
Mhm.
Explained.
No.
explained.
It would be really fun. Did somebody say photographs? Did you say that, Cory? It would be really fun. I mean, my surrogate dad passed away in January and he would have been 100 on October 3rd or 5th.
Oh.
And he used to come up here.
Mhm.
He said Kenmore was going on vacation,
Mhm.
you know, and he
Yeah.
would swim in Lake Washington when he was a little boy. And so I'm thinking if we want to show it, I think it would be really cool to have a photograph. If
So I'm
there
gonna
are
hold that thought
photographs.
for exhibit 2.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No
Getting ahead of
worries.
You're on the right track.
I'm
Getting ahead of
yes.
you, Amber. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries, I'm excited
We had tied
to
it
hear about
together.
it.
Because if we can
Okay.
buy that, yeah.
So, so subtlety is something.
Oh, sorry, Josh had a
Go ahead,
comment.
Josh.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of the points,
Ooh,
Oh,
he's
you're
cutting out.
breaking up.
Bye, Josh.
natural history or
We can't hear you very well.
Josh, send a
Sorry.
message.
getting. Is it any different now?
Yeah, try
Try it
again.
one more time.
Probably not. Yeah, I'm getting home from picking up from daycare. I was just wondering if maybe through typography to signal when something is a historic marker as opposed to present day or natural history.
Mhm.
I don't know if that overly complicates typography of the space, but you know, something, an older looking font essentially for to the point about, you know, it's not 28 feet, putting it in some sort of context, signaling that it's not today, but 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah, we just said that. Okay.
No, I'm saying, you know, that's a way to accomplish what you were talking about. I like that idea.
I think that's a great thought. There are some historic fonts, like the old railroad fonts that were used. They're very legible, you know, because they needed to be legible when something was moving, and they needed to be legible to people of all different types of schooling of 100 years ago. There are also, you know, fonts that are not as legible. So if we can find a historic font that relates to the subject matter, like there might be a maritime or a naval font that we could look at that would be appropriate for this, because it would relate to the storytelling that would also provide us with that legibility that we would need for it to be accessible. So I think that's a great idea, and another, you know, detail of layering here that we can resolve at 100%. So I'll look for some marine and naval fonts. The railroad has great ones, but it doesn't really hold here. But
Oh, yeah.
Coast Guard, I bet, has something.
It's almost to the railroad.
I was gonna say, I think we're going, right? Pretty close.
Okay, so this is what this would look like once we're off of the ground plane. So this would be basically a bent steel angle with that same 28 feet motif on it. And so as you're walking through the space, this would occur on the side of the annex building. It might occur on the corner of the community center, the corner of the, let's see.
Sure.
Yes, the picnic structure. There are also the deck that's out, you know, the grand deck that's present there. And then we want to also incorporate it on the highest element in the playground. And then really the outdoor shower will probably be the tallest thing set down at the end of the park. And so it would have an element there. So the goal would be that from standing most places in the park, you could connect your eye to 3 of these. So it would, you know, visually create a plane. So that would be the goal. So we have basically 2 styles of elements, but we may have a quantity of say 8 or 9 of these, so that we can create that effect. So you can see here, these dots that occurred, we've got, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, occurring throughout the park. There may be more, it'll depend a little bit on the cost of those things and the quantity that we want to have. So this would be something that's detailed in the plan set. We would have an exhibit that shows where these are installed, and it would be done in collaboration with the architectural team, since they would be fastened onto the building exteriors.
Yeah, maybe we can add some sort of the scavenger hunt element to that with the
So
educational
Hold
sign.
that thought for exhibit 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm holding for
Yeah.
3. Cory.
Because we're reacting in real time, would it be more beneficial if we wait until the end?
I think that's up to you guys. I can go through, oh, I got these backwards. Exhibit 3, exhibit 2. Here's exhibit 2, the wildlife scavenger hunt. Exhibit 3 is the historic photo panels.
Okay.
If you think that would be better to run through everything and then react to
I
it,
think so.
okay, All right, we can definitely do that. Okay, so here's exhibit 2. So exhibit 2, again, this is what you saw at 30%. So this showed a number of these icons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, running through the park. So what we had talked about was some sort of inlay in the concrete. And the way that we discussed doing this was as potentially a call for art through an artist, and then incorporating that as an art scavenger hunt throughout the park. So we provided a draft of the call for art, and that was sent out with the Parks and Rec Board materials. And the element that would be included with this, so we don't want to develop this all the way, because we want the artist to have the flexibility to develop it. So most of the exercises described in the call for art, we thought that species, whether they be animals or plants and animals, or insects and plants and animals, any of those things could be wonderful. The incorporation of an indigenous artist or indigenous iconography would be fabulous here. But again, some of this is, we have a call for art. Let's think about it enough to have a vision, but then we really want to leave flexibility for collaboration with the artist. And that would be something that I believe, Corey, you were saying we had an artist foundation in town. There's also the Parks and Rec Board could be involved in that. So as part of that process, if you have someone who's worked through that process before and can guide that effort, that's great. If not, we can provide some tips on getting stakeholders together to, look at that collaboration. And then essentially the way that we're looking at this in order to put a cost on it is that we would like to have these fabricated as concrete stamps. So if you're familiar with a rubber stamp, stamps on the ground, concrete stamp is larger and it's more resilient and it's deeper. And this would be something where basically we would commission an artist. The artist would develop any number of sketches or finished art pieces. Those would then be reproduced in a digital format, sent to a stamp maker. The city would essentially purchase the set of stamps, and then those stamps would be given to the contractor who would stamp them into the concrete during the construction of the park. So what you would see is, this salmon egg, or you would see this caddisfly larvae, or whatever the things are that are proposed here. And inside the community center, maybe on a pamphlet, maybe on a website, or as a panel appearing elsewhere in the park, we would have basically a key to these. So this would be something we'd work with the artist to do. It would be, the wildlife scavenger hunt. It would have the story of why these species were selected. It may have their original names. It may have some narrative, and then it would bear the artist statement. So there would be some appreciation for the local artists that had participated in this process. And this would be a way that we could incorporate their art, have it really integrated into the site's construction, still be subtle, but then still be providing the backstory for those elements. So that's the concept for exhibit 2. And then exhibit 3 is the historical viewpoints. So this is what we provided for the 30%. And so you can see here that there are some dots with an arrow. So the key is that we wanted to include these visual historical photos where you were sharing the viewpoint of the prior photo. So here I am now participating in the contemporary story of this place. And this is what would have been here before and what I would have been looking at. So this is a lovely photo that we found that it was at the confluence of the lake and Lion Creek. Great photo, it appears in the interpretive plan. And so we use this photo in our mock-up exhibit. So part of the next steps for this would be, what are those photos? I know that we've seen some of the, kind of standing in the creek and looking back towards the old glass house that was on Lion Creek, that now the patio or the platform that's there, was a component of that old house, the mid-century construction house. We've got some great photos of basically standing in the park and looking up at the Wortleman Mansion, which is fantastic. So these number of different things from all of these different parts of the park's history. And then we could even include, a photo of the ribbon cutting of this, because that again adds to the timeline here. So the number of elements might come down to the number of photographs that we have. I think this is a great way to get members of the community involved, to the historical society involved. What wonderful photos do you have? We could even have the community vote on what they thought were the greatest photos, or look for a sample of different snapshots in time. If someone has a photo and they want to donate for the cost of the sign, one could be added to the park. So again, we're still working with that 30K for all of these things together. But there are reasons why we might want to add or remove one. So this is what we're proposing. Again, this is something that we're using steel elsewhere in the park. Most of the materials in the park are what they are. So we have a wood deck that is wood. We have brick buildings that are brick. And the goal is that, you know, this park unites a lot of different epics in history from the Lake Forest Park story. And so we don't want to make something really stylistically attached to any specific era, because then it can become outdated as styles change. And so we've gone pretty neutral in terms of things like material choices, with the goal of it being timeless. And so that's what we've done here with the sign base. So the goal would be something, because these are designed to be interseating in your view, you don't want anything large. You want something visible, but again, something that you can see the foreground and the view at the same time. And so the size is 9x6 is what we're proposing, and that's what the cost estimate is based on. And we can play with any ratio of photograph to text. So typically you don't want any more than 50 words of text. That's the most. Less text, the better. The goal of interpretation and, you know, the interpretive research and literature supports this, is that you're not telling someone something. You're provoking their interest for them to want to learn more about it on their own. And so we take that to heart, and this is, you know, the ethos of these exhibits. Okay.
May I ask,
Yes, of
I'm going to make an assumption that, that these kinds of photographs and the pretty things are all graffiti, you know, what do you call it?
Well,
Yeah,
Sure.
graffiti proof,
So-
or at least able to be
Cleanable.
cleaned
yeah, so
easily
nothing is graffiti proof, but we do work with vendors that are graffiti resistant.
resistant.
Right,
Yeah.
one of the vendors that we really like is actually called Go for Signs, and they make a coated metal panel that is printable on both sides. So when you buy it, you buy the same imprint on the front and back, and you can actually flip it. So it's very resilient. You can clean graffiti art off, and they have sprays and cleaners and different techniques for that. But if someone takes a lighter to it or does anything very, very destructive, you just flip the panel over and you at least have one more time. There are lots of vendors that have things like, you know, 5 and 10 and 20-year warranties. If you're familiar with the enameled metal panels that the National Park Service uses a lot of the time, those are pretty spendy, but if you're going to get your interpretive budget once every, you know, 15 to 25 years, you go with that material because it has a 20-year warranty on it. They don't cover everything, but they tend to be, you know, resilient against fading and cracking and any of those normal things.
Yeah, I hate to bring it up, but
it's
I think
necessary.
it's important. We have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jerks who will.
Yeah, so
Put in there.
I do have a pretty extensive sample library of the different types of interpretive materials, so I could bring those in and we can go through them. There's different cost points and warranties and things like that. For this application, I would recommend Go for Signs. They're great. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, and then the sign base, we can have that fabricated by a different vendor. It's a specialty base, but it's a pretty simple construction. And there are a lot of great local metal shops that do that.
Okay, so in
Yes.
terms, let's just take this project
Sure.
of getting photos. So in terms of reaching out to the Historical Society, the community, how is that gonna happen? Are we
So-
in charge of that?
Yeah.
Cory, are,
Yeah, so we'll set up a meeting with the Shoreline Historical Museum again. We kind of gave them a
Okay.
preview of what's coming down for them, the
okay,
part of their scope, this project. And then we can look at figuring out a way to do some sort of call through our social media, too.
cool.
Yeah, so we'll do that.
Well, I'm calling my family about,
Yeah,
see if they have any pictures from guys swimming up here. We'll see.
yeah, so that'll be kind of like our next task, starting like the next meeting or two.
Okay,
And see if we can get a meeting with the Shoreline Historical,
Great.
see them on our. plan.
great.
Now, there are obviously, you know, more storytelling to the images here than the few words that would be seen on the sign. One way that we've contended with that on other projects is that there might be a QR code to lakeforestparkhistory.org, and then you can find the photo, you can find the image, you can find the storytelling, and people can contribute more. So if you do have something like a call for photos and you get 100 great photos, but really we should not put even more than say 10, 15 in this park. there are other mechanisms that you can have for recording those stories and making them accessible to the community, so, you know. That's a part of this, is gonna be to manage the information that you get. I did wanna say that when we did go to the Historical Society, one of the things that they told us was that they had, not too much, but they were like, you know, there is no give us what you have. It's a massive library of information, and so it really was, you know, tell us what you need specifically, and then that was what they would be looking at. Looks like Josh has his hand up.
Josh?
Am I correct in thinking that the number of photographs taken within the current park is going to be pretty limited just because it was mostly underwater? I guess until, no. No, for the last 100 years, it's been above water. Never mind.
That's okay. I would love to have some photos of it, pre-construction of the locks. Yeah.
Is it possible to put in one of the buildings, you know how you go to the museums now and they have running photos of. I was just at the New York Historical Museum, which was incredible, and they had a whole room that was all just photographs of New York
Mhm.
over the years.
Mhm.
And it was just, you could stand in front of a screen and they would be,
Mhm.
you know, going through like all these photographs
Mhm.
from different eras. And I'm just wondering, I don't know how much those machines cost, but if there is a plethora of photos of
Mhm.
the waterfront and people
Mhm.
at the water, this, I think that would be.
I mean, they
And
have,
even Lake Forest Park, I mean, I don't think many people really know any history about Lake Forest Park generally. I'm just saying generally.
yeah.
So I just think, I'm wondering if there's space in one of the buildings where we
Mhm.
could have one of those machines that just has an ongoing
Those are
photo thing.
remarkably affordable when you buy the small home systems. You can basically get, you know, a photo frame with a rotating digital. You can even get a unique text code where people can text photos to the code. So like, you know, I can send updated pictures of my daughter to my dad's photo frame, and it'll just pop up there and then just
Let's
cycle
not put that in the
instantly.
public park.
No.
Go wrong.
No. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that
There they are.
in terms of
You're the
having a
teenagers.
screen.
Yeah, skinny
Right.
dipping.
Right, so
In the
but the fact is,
70s.
the cost of those systems and the capabilities of them for something that either the Historical Society or the Parks and Rec Board would manage, that would be the thing, would be content curation.
Yeah.
So you'd have to,
Right.
at some point, determine what would be the rotating slideshow, whether that's everything that we get from this effort goes into a USB key that's plugged into the back of the photo screen that sits on the wall, and it just cycles through those, and you never have to deal with it again. That's one way. If it's a continuing collection of information, there is a maintenance, you know,
Mhm.
and archivist function that would need to be present there. But I think in terms of the cost of one of those, yeah, they do not tend to be very expensive. Anything that's digitally connected, unfortunately, is hackable nowadays. But it doesn't have to be, does not have to be on my phone, so.
Yeah, just is
Yeah.
to be the,
But there
those
are
slides are moving.
there are several glass walls in the new structure, so that when you know, you can see the view out to the lake, people can see the new structure, it doesn't intercede entirely. But not all of them are glass, so there is space to hang something like that, if you're interested. That's not included in the cost estimate that I'm gonna share with you, but,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it isn't something that can.
Well, it's nice to hear that it might be reasonable. I was thinking it wasn't, so.
Yeah, the resident, you know, the small like home systems, even with the additional features, are in the $200 range.
It could even
yeah.
be like a
Could be a little.
computer screen.
Mhm.
that-
Yeah, that's what
Like it
I'm,
could be something,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Seems very doable, but.
yeah, cool.
Right, I think you guys are gonna get a lot of great photos from your call for photos. And I'm sure that you will have some great ideas of what to do with them. Yeah. Great. If we get some really great ones, we can also do things like, you know, print them large format on canvas and hang them up. If there's a couple of really stellar photos, yeah.
that would be
Yeah,
fun,
the
wouldn't it?
beautiful in both the annex and in the community center building. Those will be, you know, limited access only. The city's managing the access to those buildings. So they would be visible through the glass walls and windows of the building, but they would be graffiti proof in the sense that, you
Yeah.
know, they'd be watched. Okay. So our cost estimate, these numbers are essentially what we're looking at for the lake level markers. They're about $320 per. And then the inlay into the sidewalk, $630. So this is a raw materials cost. This does not include the contractor installing them. But that's okay because all of that is added onto the construction cost estimate that you would have seen. That's that $30,000 line item. So we have a little bit of space here. This was just based on our initial, we're at 70%. These are not fabrication drawings yet. Are we in the neighborhood of feasible or too expensive? And then we tweak it and reach back out to cost estimator. So here's where we are. So everything that I've showed you is feasible and affordable for the dollars that we have in the cost estimate. Okay, so our next steps in fall and winter would be to engage the Historical Society for candidate photos, review and select photos for use in the exhibits. So that would be related to that exhibit 1. And again, if you wanted to do a call for other photos, we would essentially be bringing a template with a couple photos in it. So the best thing would be if we're doing a mix of color and black and white photos, we have some sepia tone photos. Any of those will look slightly different in the border that we're going to be using. And so we want to pick something that will show off any photo really well. We'll create a template for that, and then we'll begin developing the text. So one thing that would be critical is when you're doing a call for photos, we need to know the year, the story, and we need to know the story exactly, and then the credit for the image. Okay. So the
And in that, I'm sorry, that's the lawyer and me, like, and the permission to use it,
yes,
and the permission to put in the park, and permission to make, like, all
Right.
that has to be
Yeah.
released. Right?
so you can do like a a Creative Commons type of agreement, or you can do something like they have to sign over ownership of the photo itself. Which would mean that they have to have the ownership of the photo. So, my uncle took it and I don't talk to him anymore, but he's still living, is not necessarily as good as, I took the photo.
Right, and you have my permission.
Right, exactly. So there are templates for that type of rights release that we can get to you guys and then edit it for this project.
Great.
Especially if you're going to do something like an online form where people submit the image, submit a caption, submit the year, release permissions, all of that stuff. Okay, so next thing would be to coordinate with the local art group or groups on the call for artists, publish the art call, and then interview and select an artist. So the goal would be that we either understand that this is the exhibit that we're doing. We need to know that by the beginning of 100% design. We don't have to have their sketches. We have to have their sketches ready to print stamps before construction. But we don't actually have to have what those are. We can still finish how those will appear in the construction plans just by the idea that we have this far. Okay, so then at the 100% design, again, which we're anticipating will be a January start, we'll coordinate things like signage styles, materials, fasteners with architecture. That includes typography. So if we have bathroom signs, which we will, if there's labels on buildings, that type of thing, the goal would be that they're not, completely different and off base from the other places that we have typography in the park. So it should look, it doesn't have to match exactly, but it should look complementary. We've got determine the construction sequence and payment. So there are 2 ways that we can do this. We can either tell the contractor everything that they have to do. They have to order the stamps. They have to stamp them in the concrete. They have to design these panels, have them fabricated. They have to construct the bases, put them in the ground. Or the other way to do it is to basically have the city buy those things on the front end, and then we give it to the contractor and they put it in the ground or install it in the park. The reason that you might go with the second option is that in the first option, because this is a publicly bid contract where we're looking at competitive bids from multiple companies, we have to entertain alternates. So we may say, we want to go for signs on a Core 10 base. And they go, great, but I want you to look at having this other guy make the signs, and I want him to do an aluminum base. And you go, okay, and then you have to evaluate why that might be better or worse.
That's the contractor
That's the
saying that
yes.
to us.
Yes, we cannot say you have
Have
to
to
use this
use-
vendor
okay.
for this project. Right, we have to say, we based our design on this vendor and we will entertain any alternates for whatever reason. That is a negotiation and a back and forth that you do in public bid construction. Sometimes it can cause delays, not always. Sometimes it results in a less than what you anticipated project or product. Not always. It's just part of the process. So simplicity wise, if the city doesn't mind paying other vendors, to get these things in hand and then storing them while they're ready to be installed, then I would recommend that for these types of things. For things like artworks, particular details, I think that's a very good process. Okay. And we will also be asking that question about the play structure. So that's another one, where you can have complete control over the product. Pay for it outside of the construction contract, or you can go through the construction process and then, have those dialogues with your contractor. Okay, and then, the next thing, once we have all of that figured out, would be to finalize the plans, details, and specifications. If the contractor is, given these items, those things in the construction plans will say, buy them. You're gonna be given these things and then you install them. If that's not the case, we have to detail everything in the plans. And so it does mean that the plans are sometimes a little bit more rigorous to make sure that we have narrowed the field down to really, really what the city will accept for those specific items. And then we would actually be doing the coordination with fabricators. If we're going with the owner purchase option for these. Okay. So that concludes presentation.
Did somebody's in the chat, does Josh have something that he wants to?
Said something about a font.
Oh, great.
Just use the summary versus
Fantastic.
whale font here. Based on 1911 typography. Zapatopi. Zapatopi. How do you pronounce that, you think?
You never pronounce it, just type it.
Zapatopi.net.
Cool.
Does anybody want, do you mind opening the chat again so I can finish talking down that link? I didn't want to open the chat here because then I think it stops my screen from sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to copy this.
I can also just email it if that's easier.
Oh, great. Okay, I've got it now, but emailing is also helpful.
Submarine versus whale is a intriguing description.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, does anybody want me to go back to any slides or are there any questions or discussion?
So, can you repeat which way is preferable in terms of?
We buying it
Right.
and then giving it to the contractor
there
to install.
Right, there are pros and cons of each way.
Yeah.
This, if we basically designed this as a group and then we send it directly to the vendor, which is how most of the interpretive projects that we work on in design is, that's what we do. It gives you design control, creative control, control over the materials, and more control over the timeline. You're also not paying the contractor's markup on those items if they're procuring it like, yeah,
Just one more thing.
right,
Correctly.
yes, yeah. So, if there is some of the cons of that method are things like storing them.
Sure.
The benefit here is that we do have a site with buildings where you can store them. Which is a bonus. But anyway, it does change the way that we'll do the next part of this design process.
None of these would be too big.
Yeah, this is very straightforward.
Oh, sorry, Richie's got a hand up.
Hi, I have a question, rather a suggestion. If it's possible, because I've been reading a lot of chatter, we have a robust election this year for council, and I've been the topic of the Lakefront Park property and the funding and sources of funding has been touched on, and I went to the city website to kind of look at what information is available for the community to kind of get information to that is accurate and can inform their inform them with regards to questions on what's happening with the Lakefront Park. And I was wondering if we could have a page in the website, in the city website, where it says, popular, it will have a section on popular Q&A and will include current funding source. I looked at the website, it says 90% funded by grants. And so it will be good to have information on how much exactly is that 90%? Where exactly, which grant is exactly giving that portion of that funding? So that, because there's a lot of chatter that seems to verge on um information that's inaccurate, and I feel like it is incumbent on us and the project proponent and the city to ensure that information is accurate and easily available to the community.
Great, thanks, Richie. It's a good idea.
Yeah, we have project web pages, facets and ours, and we can, some are like still in the works, but we can update that sooner rather than later of getting all the, funding sources on there.
Okay, so we do have the latest update on this, project webpage that has the sort of FAQ about where we are with funding. One thing about the funding is that, the latest cost estimate reflects the 70% design. And so we are looking at things like, tariffs that alter the cost of things. And we are still waiting on the hearing examiner's approval and the variance approval. And so the 70% cost has a lot of contingencies built into it. There is a design contingency on top of a construction contingency on top of, just a. Yeah, because we're at 70%.
I heard
design
building
contingency.
materials are gonna be astronomically expensive. That's
Yeah.
just,
Well, and they always go up and down.
yeah,
So far,
based on the tariffs, that's what
yeah.
that's one
yeah.
area that's really gonna be affected is building materials, so I don't know how that affects our.
And it isn't just
our
this
budget.
scenario, but this is one that we're looking at, so, conveniently, when we redid our basement, timber was very high, and then it was down, but then it was high again when we did our fence. So like, this is just the nature of, projects, right? So that certain things will go up and certain things will go down, unfortunately, so. It is something that we're watching. We have a great cost estimator on this project, and they, can't see unforeseens, but they do make sure that we're smart, the contingencies that are placed on there, so that hopefully we're refining to a more accurate number, and keeping ourselves in the realm of reality for planning. And so I do think that based on the work that the city has done with the project being 90% funded, that is the whole project amount, which includes the design. Now, the design is already paid for partially because you guys have paid us to design it to 70%. So that 10% that is not covered by grants is the city's investment in the design. Everything else that we are anticipating for project construction, Corey has secured grants or grants that we know, we have a very, very, very good chance of securing the very beginning of 2026. So in terms of what's left, there isn't, aside from paying the city back for the money that it has spent on those early design phases, 90% is everything else. That's all that's left.
And if you guys have been to the Lakefront Park, or Line Creek Preserve, yeah, you'll see a future construction poster that does list with the funding partners that were used to purchase the park, so.
Nice. So one thing about listing the award amounts is that those awards can change. For example, RCO, the award that we received the last time we went through RCO, was $500,000 through the ALEA program. That's the Aquatic Lands Enhancement Act funding. They reached out to Corey earlier this year and asked if you could take more. Can you take more funding for the project? So had we put the dollar amount on the sign, it would have been outdated. So it is a reason to kind of, to keep that stuff as discussion. But I think as much as we can do to make sure that the information is accurate and whatever we can update on the website, we're happy to do so.
Great.
Okay, so my request would be that the Parks and Rec Board deliberate on the 70%, discuss them as much as you need to, and then let us know whether we're moving ahead with these. We're continuing with this idea and continuing with what we've seen today, knowing that we still have 30% more of the design to do, whether it's changing the messaging or the font or the text or the materials, but that we're still continuing in the right direction. And then these steps that are outside of what Facet's role would be, which is, doing the call for photographs, working with the historical society, and then coordinating with the art group on the call for artists, that those things will be moving ahead. And I can be an advisor on that, but the work would be mostly coordinated by you guys.
Yeah, I will hope to get, I think, a meeting with the Shoreline Historical Museum before the end of the year, fingers crossed. We have
Great.
2 months, but we can figure something out.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we are moving ahead, we can do something like use placeholder photos to get the template ready. And we can do the same thing basically for any of the other exhibits as well. So I don't think, so meeting with them in December, doing the art call, things like that, then wouldn't hold the fifth sign, but we would need to have that information essentially finished by the time that the park went to construction. Yeah. Which we're hoping for basically potentially as soon as June, July. The goal would be to get the project to bid in April, if we can. So some of that is gonna depend on what we know about the decision making that has not been made yet, so that's December.
Okay, so we need to provide input from this board on the 70% plan that you presented here. Perhaps we consider that over the next month and revisit that in our next meeting. Does that sound all right?
Does that,
Yeah, as mentioned,
That-
we're effectively on hold, basically, while
Okay.
we're, working through these land use approvals. So photos may take time to find, so I would recommend not leaving it until the last minute, but if we don't have and obviously if we pivot directions, then we will need to catch back up to where we are with other concepts. So, moving ahead, here's where we are right now with the 70% design. If we are continuing in this direction, I think if you guys made up your minds before the end of the year, then we would be fine with the timeline.
Okay.
And any additional time on that is great, because it gives us the ability to coordinate on next steps for these items.
We also got quite a few new ideas today.
Yeah, and I love that, this really is the type of discussion that we would be having, moving these things from 70 to 100%, because the exhibits are still an idea. And, once we know that we have a handful of photos, we can work on how the text appears, we can work on the typography, we'll work with the architect to see what signage is proposed for the building. There's some that's required, bathrooms, emergency, etc. There may be a park sign that we're looking at, and so does that coordinate with this, match this, is it the similar color, what are we doing with those items? So there's more to come, but it's all stuff that, that we'll go forward with, so.
So maybe maybe I could take a quick pulse check. I don't think we need to approve or anything, but does anybody feel like any of these sort of three parts of this
Can you
interpretive plan?
have a slide on 70%? Because
So exhibit 3,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's three aspects.
exhibit 2, knowing that this is going to be, this is still just an idea and that we'd be looking for engagement with an artist to move that forward. And then exhibit 1, so our historically markers.
Are we on the right track with that? Does anybody have any questions that are like, oh, I don't think that's the right direction? I'm just trying to get an early vibe of that. See how much more
My
it's gonna-
biggest concern is the signage, because having worked in several other parks over the 100 years that I've been involved there. Too much signage just takes away from what you're trying to, yeah.
I agree.
that's
Very
where
much
how we
so.
started this whole thing, which is basically why this is so subtle. It piques curiosity, but doesn't
Yeah.
distract from the rest of it.
Yeah, so the goal was that really the only signs that would exist in the landscape are these. And that we would be, really specific and intentional, especially with knowing that if this park is here for 50 years, you may want to add a few in that time. And so do we put all of the ones that we have? Do we say the oldest photo that we have is 100 years ago? And so we want 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 60 years ago, 40 years ago, and we want to represent the timeline it needs. But try to exercise some restraint. And then of course you would have the files and you would have the template for the base in case, 2 years from now you wanted to have an additional one made, you would have the ability to do that. Or 10 years from now.
Was your estimate 10 at the most of these signs? I thought I heard you say that as a
So this
topic.
70% rough estimating was that, you know, we had priced out 7 of these.
That
Right.
was right.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go more than 10, especially until you're standing in the space and you
Yeah.
feel how big or small it's.
7 sounds good. It's not that big a space.
Right, now, with this graphic, you could imagine that you could then have 4 of these printed on, you know, small cardstock things that is a rotating exhibit that is in the annex, or it's a rotating exhibit in the interior of the building. There are other ways that you can do this without putting a physical permanently installed sign. You could also, because the base will be installed and this will be affixed with tamper-proof screws, the panel, you can change out the panel if you decided that you wanted to change an image. Now, there is more of a cost associated with that than just having, you know, a print on the web kind of ability to hang these things up on bulletin boards, etc. But again, it is something where you're thinking there's a main investment in the way that this is going to be installed in the park, and then there's numerous other ways that you can add to this content through other media that is not a physical sign in the park.
My only concern is like, we do need 7 interesting things all
Mhm.
tied, sort of, and do we want them timed? Like, I would imagine if we're only at 7, it would be related to the waterfront and not to the tourist park.
Well, so the if we go back to these, this is a really wonderful statement. Throughout history, people have connected with each other and the environment through their presence and activities near the lakeshore. And then some of these things were about both outdoor experiences and nature immersion, as fostering mental and physical well-being, indigenous knowledge of the place, and then social gathering and leisure activities supporting connections and building culture. And so if we think about those as the lens of people have always been recreating in this place, they have always been present at this part of the lakeshore. Wherever the lakeshore was, it's this region in this area, whether it be, you know, the boats of people on vacation to come and hang out on Lake Forest Park, from early industrial Seattle, whether it's pre-settlement indigenous tribes that were present here with the higher lake level, any number of stories people have been. And so I think you're right, there is a lens, whether it be the lakeshore, the specificity of this property, there has been a lot going on in this little location for a very long time. And then that will continue because it will be a public park and people will continue to come to this place. And so I think letting people understand that what they're doing today relates to what happened here 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 120 years ago is really, really important. And I don't think you're going to have any trouble finding. I think you're going to have a lot of trouble narrowing it down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I appreciate, I'm sort of channeling the, like, the ones at Log Boom,
Mhm.
like, doing a good job of, like, the very specificity of, like, you're standing on the lanes, or
Mhm.
this was the history.
Mhm.
I think of it, you take, because you're standing in the spot right now,
Mhm.
you don't want it to be just Lake Forest Park all.
Right, that's true. There is the specificity to the bounds of really where you're at. That's actually a great example of where they did work with an artist as well for the incorporation of some of the elements that are interpretation and storytelling, but they're very integrated into the place. So if you are on any of the boardwalks and overlooks where they have the inscriptions into the wood handrail things at the top of the, that was all written by an artist who did some poetry and
Is that the Taiwanese park?
qualities. Yes, you're right. Sorry.
No.
Log Boom does not have those. It is
They
qualities.
do have the gutter system that sort of mirrors sort of log movement. It's really cool on the building.
Oh, yeah, that's the blue building? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For me to remember that just says something. 'Cause I'm,
Totally.
Like, not as good at recalling who's.
that's great though. That's great. So some great examples, and I know you guys have the other art installation. I mean, there's a number of ways that you can do art. You can do an object in space where it's sort of about the object. You can do integration, and so the sort of presence of the art changes the place into you being an object in it. And I think with the subtlety of the 2 other exhibits, the lake marker and the scavenger hunt, I think the fact that those are not adding really a sign that's interceding in the landscape, they're more of a subtlety on the material that's already going to be there. I think that we've done a good job of mitigating sign pollution.
I definitely think we need a marker on the play structure.
I think that'd be cool.
I think
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Any other
Yeah.
questions or comments on this to help us think about it. Feel like we're in the right direction is what the sense I'm getting from folks.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
It's very refined. Appreciate
Yeah,
the
it's fun.
restraint that's used to not go overboard. It's
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
Thank you, we appreciate that. And Richie has another comment in the chat. That's, can we change the city website label for the Lakefront Park to read future Lakefront Park updates from Lakefront Park property planning process? Since we have most
Do
of
we have a name for the park yet? Have we come up, or are we gonna just call it Lakefront Park?
No, we're not,
There's a
no.
Well,
process.
what's
Yeah.
happening? Yeah, what is the process with this?
We'll start on that as well soon, but we'll survey, we'll start here, but we'll do some sort of surveying the community. I think we'll do this after we meet with the Shore Lake Historical Museum though first, and then. We'll start.
So it kind of
that.
starts with this group. We've named a few parks before, right? So it starts with this group and then we again get a lot of input. Recommend something to the city council and they ultimately vote on it, of course. We're advisory. Did I summarize that correctly? Cory?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that all for the Lakefront Park forever? Okay, so we can,
head out.
oh yeah,
You guys are,
thank you for coming to our meeting. And
Yeah, that was really
the-
great. Yeah.
The time shift, I appreciate it.
oh, yeah, no, I appreciate it too. It's
Great.
I mean, we're gonna.
Next on the agenda is Blue Heron Park updates. Is that you?
Sure.
All
that's
right.
me. Okay, well, at this point, do you folks know what's going on at Blue Heron and,
No,
okay, so. can
Before you
give
do, do you need, was that a formal approval? Or do you need something else from us?
Corey will kind of give me the formal based on you.
Yeah, why don't you guys just.
Yeah.
Give it a week and then send me email if anything else comes up, but I think. If I don't hear anything, we'll continue.
so,
with the
yeah,
program.
so before we just get off this, is there any, is anybody feeling uncomfortable about anything that was proposed? I like all these things.
Yeah.
that-
They're great.
Great.
Yeah, I think they're cool.
Yeah, when we kick off, design again in January, we'll be really workshopping these things. You'll see some, candidate schemes for what these will actually look like and, so more to come. And there's plenty of space still for the feedback about things like topography, about, different ways that we could do things, provided that we're in the same framework that we're in thus far. There's more to come and there's, the door is not closed on making tweaks and edits to those things.
At this point, action items, should we be like soliciting photos right now? Or something like that?
Eventually, yeah, I'll start that process, but
Okay.
we'll meet with Shoreline Historical Museum and then we will put it all
Josh,
out.
up again.
Yeah,
Oh, just thinking about the signage, is there anything that we want to do to make sure that, I don't know that we have any plans to do additional signage at any of the other parks, but do we want to be thinking about coordinating materials or designs across the parks and in any way that would affect this decision? I mean, what you showed seems fine, and I assume the same calculus would apply to any other park where we wanted to add signage. And so decisions that we make for this could largely just constrain the decisions we make elsewhere. But before we make a decision, we should know that we're actually making a decision.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So we do work with other jurisdictions to sometimes come up with basically an interpretive style sheet. Or if you don't have one already, that's something where we can basically create the signs that we're designing and then provide you with a usable template that you can use as a jumping off point for other places. We'll often do things like an accessibility check. So for example, if you have different types of color blindness or myopia, is the color scheme that we've chosen, the fonts that we've chosen, is that working? Is it clear enough that it can be read by assistance reader? Those types of things. So there's a lot to consider, your kind of outward presentation is your brand, right? And the City of Lake Forest Park does already have some branding present. And so if there are things that you want us to make sure that we're bringing into this park, then it would be great if we can have those, look at them. If you have other sign projects that are going on simultaneously and this needs to coordinate with those, we're happy to do that as well. Or as Josh mentioned, that, there's a sign project that the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation is doing that's well advanced beyond this one and we need to follow their lead, we can do that as well. And I think that any of the exhibits that we've talked about, we are still, we have the ability to modify those to fit a branding guideline.
Yeah, I would say our only branding guideline would be like the park entrance signs. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so will that be updated from the one that's out there essentially? Or will there be two, one for the preserve and one for the big park?
I don't think we know yet, but
Okay,
I'm hoping one. Large. But we shall see.
Okay, great. And that would definitely be something that, we don't want multiple competing signs, for the park entrance.
Right.
And so there is a space on the annex building where there's a bit of an alcove in the structure. And, we have always thought that that would be a great place for a sign. If it is the city's, typical sign installation to have that on the frontage, so you're seeing it from the road, then we can either have those two things work together. So is it a small and a big, or is that one going away and it's an art piece, or like what else is happening in terms of the relationship between those two things?
Okay.
That would be a conversation that when design starts up in January, we would begin to be having.
Well, the big thing is, where do you park? That's gonna be the big sign. Where,
For wayfinding.
where are you parking when you come to this park? That's,
Right, yeah, so the wayfinding piece is something that we'll be talking about as well. That is much more functional signage. Some of it is
Yeah.
required, the fact that there's a roadway and a streetscape, and there's a standard set of icons that you use for labeling things like transportation signage. We do have a signing and safety plan that's in the 70% design plans, that's done by the traffic engineer. And so we do have to think of whatever signs we add to that, are they competing or duplicative, et cetera. So we can review all of those things together. One of the next times that we coordinate on this. Those traffic engineers, plus signs.
All right, thank you so much.
thanks,
Thank-
Amber.
All right, different park, Blue Heron.
Oh, God.
Sorry.
Okay, would it be okay if I just gave these
Yeah,
guys
please.
some background?
Give them an overview.
Okay. Blue Heron Park got started many, many, many years ago, and we tried to get it started, and it ran into problems numerous times. There was an idea initially to put a composting center, there. People flipped out because all they could think of was there's gonna be garbage cans. That's not what it was gonna be, but that disappeared immediately because there was so much negativity. And then 2 different times, people came out, there was 2 different landscape people that came out and did designs for landscape there. And twice they were planted, and both times they were vandalized. One time, there was a work party in the morning, and in the afternoon, these guys that had a landscape company just drove their trucks right up. They dug up everything that had been planted. They were gone. So it's been, a little bit of a problem. And then after that, everything just fell apart, and it just became what you see now. So
Like what the issue is that would cause people to do something like that?
People stealing newly planted landscape
Oh,
is.
So it's not about like something wrong.
No,
with the
it's
park.
a-
oh, no,
It's a-
no, well,
thing
the
that-
thing that's unfortunate is the way that park is facing. It's facing, the
Gas station.
gas station
It's
and then the
busy.
highway.
Easy access.
So it's easy to go in and out, and people don't know who's in and out and what they're
So-
doing. It's that kind of thing. Anyway, so hopefully, because we now have a good plan and working with Public Works and I got Rotary back on track with that because they were supposed to be helping at one time. I've got a number of other organizations. So we decided we'll go at it again and try to do some renovation. So what we looked at the site, are you familiar with it? Have you been over there?
Yep.
You know what it looks like?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is not a park you come with kids and hang out, so what's the best thing we can do there? Because of also the locale, and it's not very inviting. So the idea is to create a demonstration, educational little park. So what we want to do as we get it cleaned up, we did one work party already last Wednesday, and we had thing up to here to be picked up. And we decided we'll put it in sections. Sorry, I don't have my map here to show you. So we're gonna take one section that was the most overgrown. That's the one we started with and tried to, we're trying to clear it out. And that will be the first thing that will be planted, but not yet. Not moving too quickly, made those mistakes in other parks and other areas. It's not a good thing to do that, so we're gonna have another work party on November the 8th. And see how far we can go with cleaning up.
Excuse me, Linda.
Sure.
Blue Heron is the park, I'm being very stupid here. Blue Heron is the park behind the gas station and right near the fire station,
Yeah.
right
Bridge.
back there.
Bridge.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Okay.
I've been there.
Good, so.
I continue, sorry, once you, from the fire station, you cross the little bridge and it continues up a fair ways.
Yeah.
Beyond the little parkings. There's
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
three parking spots, right?
I've
So
visited all the parks, and I got on Crestwood, and so I'm just trying to remember.
Right,
Yeah.
Which one it is.
there's a
But
little
yeah,
more up there than I think I realized.
yeah, it's got a path, right? It goes up. It's
There, and there is a back area where I've seen people hang out. There's 2 picnic tables where there's space for people can go
Yeah.
get lunch from the town center.
Right.
You can go over there. That's what I remember people doing that.
There's a food.
Then there was Subway.
yes, yeah, semi-permanent future.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
cool.
we're
November
gonna
8th.
take a look at
Yeah,
this
November 8th.
piece. We've already started to work here. The whole goal right now is just to get it clean out as much as possible. Because of the fact that it's been planted numerous times, we think that there may be things that are still in there that would come up, and like we've already uncovered some Solomon seal that was completely covered with debris. And by clearing it out, then we're gonna step back for, the worst months of the winter, because I'm not that dedicated gardener, and we're gonna let it be and see what happens, and at the end of the winter, beginning of spring, we'll go take a look and see if there's nothing there. That gives you one answer, and then we'll start a design for planting. Across the little pathway on the left of that, it's really heavily vegetated, but I don't know that that stuff was planted or if it's all just came up from when it had been, actually had been a home at one time. So that's just that whole area back there and by the tables that Cory is talking about, just getting it cleaned up, leaving it. 3rd grade class at Lake Forest Park has already come in and they've planted 2 little areas.
Oh.
So they're kind of wanting to take care of that
Good.
and keep that, going as their little project, which I think is wonderful. Then we've got a center section that's just primarily sword ferns, which we're just gonna clean out. And I know the danger here is you try to take on too much too quickly and it doesn't work. And I've had that experience in other parts. It's not. Eventually, we'd like to move across the park into all the sections that need restoration, but taking it slow. I'm also working with people from the stream keepers because it's right, that stream goes right through that park. We want to make sure that if we do anything back there, it's nothing that's going to create a problem because we're still trying to make that a salmon spawning area again. So that's where we're at this point. And just
That's
moving
great.
one step at a time. Like I said, got a big work party on the 8th. And we'll see where we are after that. And just moving.
How are you reaching out to identify, to have people come and help? How's that? How
Well-
are you advertising that?
Well, first of all, because I'm in Rotary and at one time Rotary committed to being part of this process. So then we have the students from Shorecrest, the Interact students,
Mhm.
which that's a Rotary,
Great.
sponsored group. I'm hoping that Tyler's gonna find some of his Eagle Scouts.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, are the
Soon to
Boy
be.
Scouts and the Girl Scouts involved?
That, at this point, the way things are right now, except for Interact, who have been at all kinds of different parks and they have experience, I'm not excited at this moment to get the really younger kids involved. There's still too much, with the cleaning out and we're gonna be doing some heavy pruning. And when we took the major pieces out last week, we found a couple of hornets nests that were there that Public Works had to come and remove.
Right.
Wouldn't really.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
good.
I think when we get to the point where we've got a design plan and we're getting ready to plant and doing that, that might be a time to see if there's more kids who have interest in the environment and who want to do that, because then they can come in and it's more of a control situation where, we know what's happening here, we've got a plan and we can have, I had them do that a number of years ago at Animal Acres. We had one of the classes, again, from Lake Forest Park Elementary. So the kids came out and they grew little things and then they brought it back to plant. And that works really nicely. So you're giving them a chance to be involved here, but not overwhelming them.
Right.
So right now the work is kind of somewhat overwhelming. There's so much to
Clean up
slog
to
through and get.
And we met there a couple of weeks ago at
Yeah.
this point, and I was impressed that you had already connect with the city's arborist, so you showed up.
Oh,
we were
same,
chatting about
yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah,
And talking with Public Works about the part of it that they're doing, so it is coordinating it with the city. So it's
Yeah,
good.
we'll send out a little blurb on our e-news and stuff, and it's in the shoreline area news as well, so. It's kind of how like the other two work parties are. Getting noticed.
so.
Thank you for all your effort. It's pretty impressive.
I've been waiting, I can't tell you how many years to get back into Blue Heron Park and to see what we can do to get it, to get it going again.
Yeah, it's
Especially
bad.
now, with people being more environmentally conscious and the need for understanding about, not using pesticides and the importance of native plants and pollinators and what that all means. And that, so when she was talking about signage, that's another thing we're looking at. Signage in that park is very old and it's not very helpful. What we'd like to see is some really good signage that's got really good information so that people can come. What I'd like to see is people understanding that maybe things that they have in their yard that they might have thought they were gonna chop out, or it's a native plant, maybe I don't want to disturb that, maybe that's habitat.
When you said demonstration garden, I think my understanding of that was an example of native
Yes,
plants,
yeah.
like a demonstration of how they look,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they grow well.
And
Yeah.
doing your own.
Exactly.
Yeah, so like
Successful.
what, there's a lot of sun in that park. So what we plant over there, like we have a shade garden, a pollinator shade garden in Animal Acres, we wouldn't plant the same things. Wouldn't, the watering, how, what you need to water. We think, we got water over there, so that's another piece that we're gonna develop some kind of an irrigation system. And that would be helpful, to keep things going. So just trying to bring it back to life and have it have some meaning,
Right.
Okay.
There we are.
Thank you.
Everybody's invited to the work parties.
Looking at the time, I think we need to move to the Horizon View art installation. Do you have any updates on that, Courtney?
Yeah, we had I'm gonna call it the donation ceremony on Saturday. It's not fully finished up there yet, but it's
Was it wet?
installed. It was very wet on Saturday.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was actually like, there was a
Yeah,
break, there was a decent break in rain, so it wasn't raining the entire time, but, yeah, so if you haven't seen, you should go up there, it looks great,
It's very fun.
yeah,
Very
it's fun, it's
colorful, very
colorful.
whimsical.
We'll do,
Very
there's a plaque that needs to go on there, and then we'll do like a sign, giving the artist like inspiration and background and a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
And then we'll do something in the spring when the pathway is done and grass is grown back and
Oh, so that's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah,
Is there gonna
hopefully-
be grass up to it or?
Yeah, there'll
Is
be a
it
little
concrete
path,
or-
there'll be like a little rock pathway kind of around it and up to it, but
Okay.
grass in that area will be.
Is that for accessibility? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's
Oh,
really
yeah, it's gonna
cool.
be great. The kids are gonna just love it.
Yeah,
It's very
Melissa-
whimsical.
Cole, the artist, she's very cool. We're very lucky to have one of her pieces.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. It's great.
Cool. So get up there if you can, if you haven't already. Speaking to myself, apparently. Let's see, anything else on the agenda that we need to, we have an other category. It's kind of our fail safe. If anybody has anything else.
Was there anything else on the windscreens and the benches for the? For the
I haven't
tennis court?
gone any farther yet, but
Okay,
I'll try.
that would be great.
Yeah.
We were just talking about it yesterday. I said, well, I'm gonna be here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be at the Parks Board tomorrow night. I'll ask.
Yeah.
They were bugging me.
Yeah, the windscreens, I think we'll be able to get sooner rather than.
And those benches weren't very expensive that I sent you. They
No.
were pretty reasonable.
And I'm wondering if we have some other benches around right now,
Perfect.
so we'll.
That
we'll
would
get
be
something.
great, because that would be really helpful, because we have, we have no benches. People bring chairs and then they bring them in and out, and it's kind of a pain, so. We were just talking about it yesterday, so thank you.
Corey, I had something,
Yeah.
the park that's called the new park. Is
What
there
new park?
any, it's just called the new park, it's behind Animal Acres?
Oh,
Big tree
Oh, it's
park.
Big Tree Park. No, it's
Oh,
Brookside.
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 Oh,
Is there
Brookside.
any like, is there any thought, like, cause it just
happens
says
with that?
new park, like,
Yeah, it's
Decide.
just, it's gonna sit there as it is until we can start planning, get into planning.
okay, what is the plan for that park?
We have to go through the similar process like
Gotcha.
this for that, but
Yeah,
we'll have
right
to
at
kind of
the
maybe
barbecue.
look at that a little bit differently too, seeing if it can be incorporated into Animal Acres a little bit more, so.
Yeah, it's a little tough to read. I was like, wow,
Little
they said-
bridge.
and it's not used that much and it's fenced. I was like, make it a dog park.
Oh, what a good idea, Steve.
Josh has a hand up.
That's a great idea.
Big Josh.
Great idea.
Have you been?
I know where you're talking. It's right behind the Animal Acres.
Yeah.
right?
Josh,
Across
did you
the
wanna
creek.
go?
Josh.
Josh?
Sorry, it's just hard to get to the unmute button. I was just
Okay.
going to mention I had sent an email around to the group at some point, but just to say in a meeting so that it's here also, not as part of anything on the Parks Board, but just as a thing that I had noticed, a property that was for sale and that is wooded and has creek going through it and all, and that serves a part of the city that doesn't have parks right now. So I've put up a petition page for people to sign up and ask if it can become a park. So it's the for sale sign is still out front there, so I don't know what goes into that, but that is a discussion that is happening out there and may add to our portfolio one of these days.
Where's the property, Josh?
It's at the intersection. The intersection has 4 different street names. So it's 35th Avenue coming north, and then 40th Place going east, or 202nd going up the hill the other way.
Well, it used to
It's
be.
like on your way to Mount Lake
Lane.
Terrace.
Yeah, on the way up to the QFC in Mount Lake Terrace.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no,
so at that corner, on the southeast corner of that intersection, it's 37th Avenue going north from the intersection. It's 35th going south. I will not even try to figure out why, but it's true. And so it's the Blind Creek goes through through the edge of it, and it's got some slope going up. Apparently there was a house on it at some point in history, but not for at least 30 years.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Little old lady lived there.
And it's about an acre and a half.
But Josh, isn't it at least in part wetland?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine anyone would be able to develop on it, frankly.
House kind of fell down.
Yeah, sounds like.
All right, that sounds good. Do we need to put any comments in about the next meeting? When it's scheduled or
Yeah, so I just,
during,
I'm okay with meeting that our next meeting's the Tuesday of Thanksgiving
okay,
week.
I'm not too good.
You won't be here.
Nope.
Do we want to try to look at moving it up or,
well, we don't usually have a December one.
yeah, so we could have one meeting before the end of the
Right.
year and it might be,
Should.
it might be, yeah, it might be two, depending on when the shoreline historical
Oh, right.
meeting, group can meet.
Yeah.
But I'd like to get one or two meetings in before the end of the year. One just might be a daytime. But I guess I
We
can,
can figure out,
Yeah,
I'm thinking
coordinate
we
that.
should figure out how to organize the whole approach to the photos.
yeah, well.
Cause that would be a fun, I think that would be a really fun project. I would just,
It's like a,
I'm thinking that that's gonna be great,
Yeah,
collecting and looking at them and choosing and.
so maybe
I
I'll
would be happy
send,
to be part
I'll
of
ask,
that.
send out availability for the week of November 17th. That's just the week before
yeah,
Thanksgiving.
yeah.
And
maybe some time to meet in December
yeah,
if that comes up. Okay, that sounds great.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh, we should ask for public comments. Are there any public
We have
participating?
one public participating. If
Great.
you want to, you can raise your hand.
Okay, so yeah, as Corey said, if you let us know if you want to raise your hand, you can speak. Otherwise, we'll just move on. And I think we're almost done. Just a quick reminder, I think there's an election coming up, so find your ballots.
Yeah.
Make your vote count. Lots of good things to vote for. So
Yeah.
check that out. All right, I think that's all. We are therefore adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.